talk about the development of early Buddhist schools. There are some new ideas around. First, let us say, let us mention the dates of the Buddha. He died in 483, must have been born 563. He lived to be 80. Those dates were established by A.K. Narayan, the late A.K. Narayan from Benares. So, and then immediately after his death, there was a meeting, a Sangiti. Sangiti means chanting together of the Dharma and the Vinaya. But of course, there was no schism yet. Although I must say that even in the time of the Buddha, there were already people who would turn out to be Mahasangikas later. For example, Manjushri. It has been established recently that Manjushri in the time of the Buddha was Visakha Panchali Buddha, and that was supposed to be Manjushri. So, and Manjushri is the wisest of them all. He has the wisdom of the Mahasangikas, of emptiness wisdom. So, the differences, different opinions were already there during the life of the Buddha. Of course, that should not be surprising. And then came the second Sangiti in Vaishali around 100 years after the death of the Buddha, so that would make it about 380 BC. But no schism resulted from that. But not too long after that, around 340, there was a discussion. The Stavidas, seeing or wanting to bring a bit more discipline to the Sangha, wanted to add a few minor rules to the Vinaya. Majority did not agree. So the Mahasangha did not agree. The Sangha agreed, of course, but the Mahasangha did not. So there was a split. In India, in order to have a split, to a Sangha Bheda, you need a problem with the Vinaya. Only a Vinaya dispute can explain a schism in India. Quite different from East Asia, where it's more doctrinal. But in India, it's the Vinaya. So there was a Vinaya problem around 340 BC, and the first split was there. Sangha and Mahasangha. The Mahasangha did not want to be any stricter than before. All right. And then comes along Ashoka, the Mauryas. Ashoka comes along, let's say about 240, 250 BC, something like that. Ashoka, and during Ashoka there was a meeting, again, a Sangiti. And there was a new group forming in those days, namely the Sarvastivadins, formed in the time of Ashoka. And they lost the meeting. They were the losers in the meeting during the reign of Ashoka. And the winners called themselves Vibhajyavada. Vibhajyavada was a very good term. The Buddha had used it for himself. It's mentioned in Anguttara Nikaya, Dasaka Nipata. So Vibhajyavada, a distinctionist, an intellectual person, that was the term used by the traditional Sangha for themselves. And the others were the Sarvastivadins, who were the losers in those days. So after the Vibhajyavadins, they spread all over India. Of course, and when they were all over India, which is the world for them, which is Mahi, when they were spread all over Mahi, all over the Indian cultural area, they were called Mahi Shasakas. So the Mahi Shasakas are Vibhajyavadins when they were all over. And the Indian cultural area, to define it a bit more precisely, goes from northern Afghanistan, which is Bactria. Also, it includes Gandhara proper, which is Pakistan today. So it is much wider than the present country of India. The northwestern cultural area, the Gandharan cultural area, which is Gandhara and Bactria, those two, and then from the 2nd century AD, Kashmir joins this area. So this is the northwestern cultural area. The Chinese call it Jibin. Jibin, Ji means kambal. It is a woolen cloth, an upper garment also. And Bin means a foreigner, a guest. So the area where those Kambala foreigners came from was the Gandharan cultural area, the northwestern area, but from 2nd century, Kashmir is included, right? So those people from Jibin, they developed. The Sarvastivadins developed. And new development started. The Sarvastivadins are not enemies of Pudgalavada, actually. You know, Pudgalavada Buddhists are those Buddhists who believe more, they don't say so, but more or less they believe in an Atman, in an ego. And the Buddha had said there is no Atman, no ego, which is very, very wise, because many problems start with ego problems. Yes, if you don't have it, then you don't have those problems. So, but Pudgalavada had something of a Pudgala, of an ego, and there was a group believing in that, and they split from the Sarvastivadins around 280 before Ashoka. Before Ashoka, so those. Let us not count them, because they are not mainstream and never will be mainstream. So the Sarvastivadins developed. Time of Ashoka comes. Ashoka, yes. And then in the time of Ashoka, they split off. They went their own way. And then they developed, of course. The next step in the development is, let us say, the 2nd century AD. In the 2nd century AD, in the northwest, in Kashmir, the Kushanas, namely Kanishka, who reigned from 155 to 179, that's what people believe now. During King Kanishka, there was a meeting of Sarvastivadins, and the Sarvastivadins established a new Abhidharma. Before Kanishka, there was, of course, Abhidharma. Abhidharma means about the Dharma, but that Abhidharma was just explanation what to do, how to practice to reach the stage of an Arhat. And this is not expounded by the Buddha. But in the time of Kanishka, those Staviras in Kashmir established an Abhidharma in Sanskrit, spoken by the Buddha. So when it's spoken by the Buddha, you don't have this meditation manual tradition and all that. You just take it, and that's it. This is Hinayana, by the way. So during Kanishka, there was a new orthodoxy of the Sarvastivadins. Central text was the Jnana Prasthana, Jnana, development of knowledge. Knowledge was central, not only for the Sarvastivadins. Ignorance was worst there could be, but knowledge was central, especially for Sarvastivadins. So Jnana Prasthana, how to develop that, was explained in Kashmir, to the north, 2nd century. By the way, at the same time, in the south of India, you had Nagarjuna, who was establishing his Madhyamaka group, Madhyamaka school, emptiness, propounding emptiness. They were Prajaptivada people. I always thought that Prajaptivada is a group within the Mahasangikas, no special Vinaya. They are just Mahasangikas. But their opinions were the opposite of what the Vaibhashikas were saying in the time of Kanishka to the north. This the new Orthodox, so-called Orthodox Sarvastivadins were the Vaibhashikas. Because of their text, the Mahavibhasha, they are known as Vaibhashikas. Into the old Ashtagrantha had several Vibhashas, several commentaries by different people from different areas of the Gandharan area. They had the Vibhashas, but because it was a rewriting, new Jnana Prasthana, expounded by the Buddha, you needed a new Vibhasha. That was the Mahavibhasha, and because of that, they were known as Vaibhashikas. By the way, this so returning to the Sarvastivadins, there are many kinds of Sarvastivada, by the way. Their Vinaya was, of course, always the same. But their yoga, their practice, developed quite a great deal. Ultimately, it even took in Hindu yoga practices when it became Mantrayana, because the Mantrayanists are Sarvastivada Vinaya followers. So this is the development of the Sarvastivadins in a general way. And we, Kanishka, and the people who were saying the opposite, the followers, the Prajaptivadins in the south, Madhyamaka, Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka, they were active at the same time, different places. Let me also say something about the Mahasanghikas, because the Mahasangika just means a person of the majority, the Mahasangha, right? And they did not want any change from the start, and they never did. There is only one Vinaya, special Vinaya of the Mahasanghikas, that is the Lokottaravada Vinaya of the Lokottaravada Mahasanghikas in the northwest, but they are the exception. All the other Mahasanghikas had the same Vinaya. And when during Ashoka, the traditional ones called themselves Vibhajavada, just like the Buddha had called himself, with this good intellectual sounding appellation. At that same time, in the south, the term Bahushrutiya was used. Bahushruta also means learned. So the Bahushrutiyas are the learned people, just like the Vibhajavadins were the learned traditional Sangha members. So Bahushrutiya in the south. Prajaptivada are a group, and their Vinaya was no different from the main Mahasangika Vinaya, as I said. So this is already... the Sarvastivadins should really take much of our attention, because they developed, as I said, their Vinaya did not develop. Their Vinaya was originally, it grew and grew because there were more illustrations to the rules, more stories to the rules, more drashtantas. That is why traditional Sarvastivadins with this long Vinaya can be called Dashtantika. They had a Vinaya with many drashtantas. By the way, they can also be called Sautarantikas. The traditional Sarvastivadins, Sautarantikas, only the Buddha had only spoken the sutras and the Vinaya, but the sutras, not Abhidharma. So because the Buddha had only spoken sutras, there are Sautarantikas. In the 2nd century, during Kanishka, Sarvastivadins were establishing an Abhidharma spoken by the Buddha, but that was Hinayana. That was not mainstream. And also, I'd like to stress that while people are talking about this new Vaibhashika orthodoxy in Kashmir during Kanishka, actually, they were never the really majority. when they existed, the traditional old Sarvastivada groups remained and eventually won. At the end of the 7th century, the Traibhashikas are hard to find, actually, and the traditional Sarvastivadins win with the term Mula Sarvastivada, Mula root, basic. And they had a long Vinaya with all the Drishtantas, with all the illustrations. And they were also Sautarantikas. I did not believe the Abhidharma was spoken by the Buddha, you see. Now, about the Sarvastivadins, the traditional ones, from their groups issues the so-called Pure Land Buddhists. Pure Land Buddhism, and even Chan, even Zen, comes from their circles. And Mantrayana, I already mentioned that. Let me explain it a little bit more. Zen, there is a text by Tanlin in Chinese. It's called 2 Axes and 4 Practices, 二入四性论, and that text about the 2 axes and the 4 practices explains Zen, basically. And the Zen as we know it is the work of Bodhidharma, yes? Bodhidharma, well, around 500 AD, something like that. He was Persian, but he was born in South India. As a Persian, he must have come from the Bactrian area, from the northwest. So his family must have come from the northwestern Gandharan cultural area, probably Bactria, where there was a large Persian presence, and Bactria was mainly Sarvastivada. So, but he was born in South India, and from there he went to China, and he did not know Chinese, so he meditated. He practiced cliff meditation, not wall gazing. Very often one hears wall gazing. One sits in front of a wall and gazes at the wall, but actually this wall is a cliff. Bodhidharma was sitting in a cave up a cliff. So this wall is a cliff. So it's cliff meditation, actually. Today one can still visit this Bodhidharma cave near the Shaolin Temple in northern Henan in China. So this Bodhidharma, and Bodhidharma is known to come from, and then the Chinese says xiang zhi. Xiang means fragrance, and zhi means reached. This is Gandhavati, yes. This is a very good Chinese translation for Gandhavati, for Gandhara, actually. It is not Koshi, as the Japanese say. Yeah, it is Koshi. You pronounce Koshi in Sino-Japanese, but the meaning is Gandhavati, Gandhara. So Bodhidharma is a Persian from the Gandharan area, born in South India, and he went to China and he practiced cliff meditation. You see, those things are not unimportant to know. There is Pure Land Buddhism. The Pure Land, pure is of course Shuddha, pure, but it is that's not the meaning. The Pure Land Buddhism, the Pure Land indicates an antarabhava, an intermediate existence. After you die, and before you're reborn, or not reborn in nirvana, there is an intermediate existence there. It doesn't happen immediately, this transition. So you go through an intermediate existence, through an antarabhava. And the Pure Land is an antarabhava, an ideal intermediate existence. And it's important to see it like that, because it is like that. I already corrected some things about Bodhidharma, and now I'm talking about Pure Land. This Pure Land is an antarabhava, simple as that. And of course, in China it was never very really popular, but in East Asia, China and especially Japan now, it's really Pure Land is really the most current, the most followed, the most practiced kind of Buddhism there is. Most Buddhists are Pure Land Buddhists in East Asia. So they are basically Sarvastivada people. Their Vinaya must have been the Sarvastivada Vinaya, probably the long one with all the stories, the Drishtantas to it. I already explained Drishtantika, Sautrantika, the difference, but there it could be, it's quite possible, that some Sautrantikas who do not believe that the Abhidharma was spoken by the Buddha, that some are not Darshtantikas, that their Vinaya was not the long one with all the Drishtantas, but the Vaibhashikas in Kashmir abbreviated their Vinaya. They removed most of the stories, most of the Drishtantas. So, and they only kept the Dashabharavara Vinaya in 10 parts, a shorter one, a modern one. The rules did not change, but the quantity changed quite a bit. So it is quite possible that some Sautrantikas adopted this new, modern, brief Vaibhashika Vinaya from Kashmir. And so this is, I already said many things actually. The Sarvastivada Vinaya. Finally, as I said, the yoga of Sarvastivadins continually changed. And finally, they also took in Hindu yoga. So at the end of the 7th century, shortly after Xuanzang in China, at the end of the 7th century, the Vaibhashikas, the people from Kashmir, almost did not exist anymore. The traditional ones won. And at the end of the 7th century, Sarvastivada becomes traditional Sarvastivada with a long Vinaya, and it's not Buddha Bhashita, it's not spoken by the Buddha. This is, well, of course, it is very tempting to be, and for an intellectual, it is good to be interested in this Buddha Bhashita Abhidharma as established in the 2nd century AD during Kanishka, with 7 Abhidharma texts spoken by the Buddha, central one being the Jnana Prasthana, development of knowledge, and 6 other ones. So, and Xuanzang translated it in the middle of the 7th century, so very late actually, while in India it was already weakening considerably. But after Xuanzang, we know that, for example, Yi Jing, the Chinese monk who visited India, when he talks about Sarvastivada, when he mentions the Sarvastivada Vinaya, he means the long one with all the Drishtantas, the traditional one. We call it Mula Sarvastivada. This is well, actually, the development of most schools like that. So it's, again, to summarize the whole idea, it is when the Buddha died, there were different opinions during his lifetime, but no split in the Sangha. And then later, there was the Mahasangha splitting from the Sangha, when the Staviras wanted to add a few rules to the Vinaya. This is mentioned in a text in the Shariputra Paripurcha Sutra, by the way. Shariputra is the question, the title is The Questions of Shariputra, and Shariputra is supposed to be the wisest of the traditional schools, of the Sarvastivada schools. So when he asks the questions, that means it doesn't belong to that school. The text probably belongs to the Mahasanghikas. Anyway, in this Shariputra Paripurcha, it is mentioned that Staviras wanted to add a few rules, and the Mahasangha did not agree, so split. And then comes Ashoka, and the Sarvastivadins come into existence, and the traditional ones call themselves Vibhajavada. At the same time, I guess the Mahasangikas call themselves Bahushrutiya. And this also the Mahasangikas have developments. They would never, the Mahasangikas and the Sangha people would never unite again. Even today, they're still two lineages, two families, two big families. So in the time of Kanishka, Sarvastivadins established a new Vaibhashika orthodoxy, called Vaibhashika because of the Mahavibhasha, the new commentary on the Jnana Prasthana. That's why they're called Vaibhashikas. And at the same time, in the south, Nagarjuna is active, Prajnaptivadins are active, but again, Prajnaptivadins are not a special, separate Nikaya. The word Nikaya means separate body. Yes? Kaya is body. Nikaya, separate body. They have their own Vinaya. So that did not happen. And then the Sarvastivadins develop, of course, and also the Vibhajavadins develop. And when they're all over India, all over Mahi, you can call them teachers of Mahi Shasakas. And this is what happens with the traditional Vibhajavada people. The traditional Vibhajavada people also do some developments, of course. The Mahishasakas lost the Dharmaguptakas, for instance. The Dharmaguptakas are called, well, their Vinaya was different from the Mahishasakas, or there would not be any schism, any Sanghapeda. The Vinaya of the Mahishasakas was in 5 parts. The Vinaya of the Dharmaguptakas was in 4 parts. And became very, very, very popular in China. It is actually the Vinaya followed in China today is the Dharmaguptaka one. It had a Mahasangika influence. There also are Kashyapiyas, by the way. The school I did not yet mention are Theravada. And I know that some of you are waiting for that. Now, Theravada was written down, their Abhidhamma was written down in about 35 BC in the south. They are traditional schools. They go back to Ashoka. They are Vibhajavada people. They are a Vibhajavada school, and Vibhajavada, as I said, is a name for the traditional Sangha ever since Ashoka's days. And in the south, they wrote down an Abhidharma in Pali. Pali means sacred text, and it's also the language of that sacred text, which is called Pali. So in the south, Theravada means Staviravada. They are the traditional Staviras, and they write down their Abhidhamma as spoken by the Buddha, they say. Now, if you do that, if you write it down, an Abhidhamma spoken by the Buddha, you establish a new orthodoxy, and you are Hinayana, because the Mahayanists, they are involved in this action-reaction process. They borrow. The Mahasangikas, they are Mahayana. Mahasangikas call their own kind of Buddhism Mahayana. And the others, for instance, Vastivadins, when they use emptiness, for instance, in their practice, in their yoga, they call themselves Mahayana too, you see. And the Mahasangikas, when they use a Sarvastivada idea in their technique, they call the result Ekayana, one vehicle. Ekayana is actually Mahayana, but using a traditional technique, or taking over a traditional text. For instance, the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra starts as a Bactrian text, Sarvastivada text, and is taken over by Mahasangikas, and then it's called Ekayana. So, but the Mahasangikas call their own original form of Buddhism Mahayana, and the others, using their ideas, call themselves Mahayana too. Hinayana is only there when you have a Buddha Bhashita Abhidharma. An Abhidharma spoken by the Buddha in heaven, then you are not involved in this action-reaction process. This is In general terms, the explanation for Mahayana, actually. And, well, because of this, I, uh, I think there are still many problems. I'm sure I did not solve all the problems, but I'm sure I gave some new ideas. And those ideas are written in as journal articles, mostly in the Journal of Buddhist Studies, as edited in Hong Kong, edited by the Venerable Dhammajoti. He brings many of my articles about the subjects I've been talking about, so in the Journal of Buddhist Studies. And the second periodical in which I regularly have those written new ideas is the Indian International Journal of Buddhist Studies. It's abbreviated IIJ, Indian International Journal, BS of Buddhist Studies. It is edited in Benares, in India. So those two periodicals, you will find most of the things I have been talking about. Uh, of course, it is easier to just adopt what the others have said before you. But if one should be interested in the truth, what really happened. And in India, I've limited myself greatly to India, basically. In East Asia, with East Asia I mean China, Japan. The situation is a bit different, but you can only start explaining the Chinese, the Sino-Japanese situation if you have some clear idea about the Indian origin. And this is what I've been saying. If you have a problem, a question, you can always ask it to the friends in India, or you can go online and find an address and ask people, and your teachers, they will, I'm sure, help you. Thank you for your attention.